Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Tipsy Testing on Thursday today. That's exciting. A little shake things up a little bit. I'm Jessica Moore. I'm the Customer and Partner Success Manager with Inflectra. And today we have with us Henrik Rexed from France, from Neotys. Henrik is a performance engineer at Neotys, which is a leading provider of load testing software. He is currently the partner technical evangelist and the one building the tools and plugins for performance engineers. I'm going to go ahead. We do have some submitted questions from the audience. I'm going to go ahead and start with those today. Please tell us how you have become a performance engineer.
I used to be a developer and architect, working for several projects. And one day I finished working as a consultant for a GSI at the moment. And once I finished one of the engagement, someone came across me and say, "Hey, you want to work in performance testing?" And the only thing that I heard was testing. I say, no testing, because for me testing was like functional testing, and you just generate test cases and so on. So no way, I don't want to do that. And then I Google performance testing. I look at it and say that was in a couple of 10, 12, 14 years ago. And I say, wow, no, there is a big demand. I mean, I see something coming there. So I started to invest myself there. And since then, I never left.
Is there one thing, is there one performance check that you should do even if you are not a performance tester?
I mean, there's the basics. Performance testing is about a simulation. So first of all, that's more complicated if you know in performance testing, but you should at least identify the tests and the workload model that will represent the real production activities. Otherwise, your test doesn't represent life, and people will say, "Hey, performance testing doesn't reflect production." But that is the first basic. But the second thing that I would recommend if you start is making sure that your test is relevant. So yeah, basically basic check, hit per second, user low throughput, errors, and then of course if you're more in the performance engineering, then you will look on other KPIs, of course.
I mean, I'm not a performance engineer by training, and as a company, that's not really an area that we have a lot of focus on. But the one thing I remember reading at a presentation done by one of our partners, shout out to Caveras, who were on a previous Tipsy Testing, they talk about some of the things you can do in your CI pipelines, and one of the things they talk about there, I'm going to paraphrase, is that just because you're not doing performance testing at the same level when you're doing a build, make sure you have some performance checks in your pipeline. So have some simple checks, do some simple measuring, and then you can check if your builds and your CIs are consistently running at a certain number of seconds, and you're timing these different events when you run your tests, your automated test through. If you start to see a major divergence, it's a red flag that means you need to do a deeper dive in performance. So I think even if you're not a performance engineer and that's not your group's responsibility, keeping an eye on it when you're doing your other testing and being able to track the metrics over multiple CI builds and multiple pipelines, you can see, is there an early indication of a problem that you might need to investigate, I think.
Can you name one thing that has shifted or changed your outlook? So you can pick on what your outlook is and what has changed or shifted it.
More on the business side, I would say I think we back in the old days we were thinking that evangelizing developers to start testing every time they do something. I mean, in the performance world, was very hard or difficult or impossible. I think now with the shifted with the agile and moreover with the DevOps, it makes more sense.
Now you mentioned that you wanted nothing to do with being a software tester until you heard that it was performance. But I will start with you with this one. What would be the best approach to start as a software tester?
I think in the performance there is I think first of all I'm going to bring that up. There is no education path. But if you want to become a performance testing, the first thing I would say, which is important, you need to be able to communicate. And of course, you need to be technical because you will deal with a lot of architecture concepts, a lot of technologies, a lot of technical stuff.
Adam, how about regular testing?
To be a regular tester. And I think even if you look at non-functional testing, there's definitely people who have different skill sets within that. So people who are more technical who may not want to gravitate to the performance side. Being an automation engineer, being a security tester, there's lots of very, very technically skilled testing fields where you're almost coming from a semi-programming side. Or you might be coming more from the social sciences, perhaps as an exploratory, what we used to call a manual tester was someone who just could follow scripts and click buttons, and that's gone. But I think as a manual tester, a human tester, someone who's looking at the experience of the user, you're coming from a social science background. You have to understand what are the user's expectations, where are they struggling. You have to understand what is the business reason we have this work. It's questioning not just does it work, but why does it work this way? And I think that's where testing is elevated well beyond what used to be considered testing, because you test the requirements. Well, why did we design this user story in this way? And if you're a really good tester, you should be thinking that way. You shouldn't be saying, here's the story, let me go test it. It's, let me test the story. The story makes no sense. It's idiotic. A good tester should be always trying to, where possible, where they're allowed to, question what they're testing before they do the testing.
Henrik, what are some of the biggest challenges that have surfaced during the pandemic from the point of view of performance testing? And what safeguards should companies be putting in place to avoid disruptions now or in general?
So I think the COVID-19 has been the good excuse to be, I think, to for the company that didn't do their digital transformation to start them quickly. It's sad to say that, but the COVID-19 was a way of showing how much concurrency and high traffic could impact more and more the organizations.
People are using this opportunity to reevaluate their tool sets, because if everyone's working from home, they need tools that are not just going to perform from a speed standpoint, but also are usable and are designed to work from home. There's a whole digital transformation that Henrik alluded to beyond just the performance side, but it's obviously an opportunity as they do that to then include, design them with high scalability in mind and test that from day one.
Can you speak to artificial intelligence around performance testing?
Wow. I guess I know nothing about this, so I'll speak from complete ignorance and utter making this up. I mean, you're trying to simulate user behaviors and you're trying to also look for patterns. So I think AI machine learning can be very useful in sifting through large amounts of data that may be collected during performance analysis and performance testing, maybe finding what the bottlenecks are. I think so you could use machine learning to help with the detective side of things. And I think maybe trying to simulate user behaviors, maybe having AI, so rather than just the sort of standard ramp-up patterns and the standard user behaviors where you're following predicted patterns, maybe it's AI can help you come up with more interesting user loads that would be representative of things that maybe we hadn't seen before that it could predict. I don't know. What do you think, Henrik?
So there is a few cases with that we are currently working on. A human that tries to have a look at everything in terms of timing, it's going to be super expensive. So having a process, a pattern that detect things and not necessarily do your work, but at least help you to make the right decisions. With the amount of data we're collecting, it's basically quite impossible to process everything with a normal human being brain. So you need to have a system that guides you and point out, here you got a problem, you should look at this. Basically guiding the analysis. I think that's a use case that's going to be super helpful for all the performance community.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Henrik. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know it's probably time for you to brush your teeth and go to bed in France now, but thanks for staying up with us. And for everyone else, thanks for joining us. And we'll see you next week. Bye.
Sounds good. Bye-bye.
Thanks for
Nice to see
organizing.
you, Henrik.
Have a nice evening.